The champagne glasses clinked one last time aboard the Splendour that fateful November night in 1981. The yacht rocked gently in the dark waters off Catalina Island, but inside, a storm was brewing that would end in tragedy and spawn one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. For over 4 decades, the world has wondered what really happened to Natalie Wood. Now, at 95 years old, Robert Wagner has finally broken his silence, and what he's revealed changes everything we thought we knew about that night. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is about truth, justice, and a legendary actress whose final moments have haunted us for generations. Picture this. It's Thanksgiving weekend, 1981. While most Americans are enjoying turkey dinners with their families, Hollywood royalty is aboard a luxury yacht named Splendour, anchored in the pristine waters near California's Santa Catalina Island. The guest list reads like a who's who of American cinema. Natalie Wood, one of the most beautiful and talented actresses of her generation. Her husband Robert Wagner, a suave leading man known to friends as RJ and Christopher Walken, the intense method actor who would go on to become an icon. Also present but often overlooked in the initial reports was Dennis Davern, the boat's captain, a man whose testimony would later become crucial to understanding the events of that night. They were supposed to be celebrating. Wood and Walken were filming a science fiction thriller called Brainstorm, and this weekend getaway was meant to be a relaxing break from the pressures of Hollywood. But beneath the surface of laughter and luxury, tensions were simmering that would soon explode into a nightmare no one could have predicted. To truly understand the magnitude of what happened that night, we need to understand who Natalie Wood was. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20th, 1938, in San Francisco to Russian immigrant parents, she was thrust into the Hollywood spotlight before she could even tie her own shoes. Her mother, Maria, was a failed actress living vicariously through her daughter, pushing the young Natalie into the entertainment industry with an almost obsessive determination. By age 4, Natalie was already appearing in films, and by age 8, she landed the role that would make her a household name. Susan Walker in the Christmas classic Miracle on 34th Street. That film captured America's heart and introduced the world to those luminous brown eyes that would captivate audiences for decades to come. But childhood stardom came at a price. Natalie later revealed that her mother filled her head with superstitions and fears, including a chilling prophecy from a fortune teller that she would die in dark water. This prediction would haunt Natalie throughout her life, creating a deep-seated fear of water that everyone close to her knew about. As Natalie transitioned from child star to adult actress, she defied the odds that crushed so many young performers. Where others faded into obscurity or fell victim to addiction and scandal, Natalie Wood became even more luminous. At 16, she earned critical acclaim for her role as Judy in Rebel Without a Cause alongside James Dean, a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination and established her as a serious dramatic actress. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Natalie became one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, commanding huge salaries and choosing roles that showcased her remarkable range. She played Maria in West Side Story, bringing vulnerability and passion to the iconic role, even though her singing voice was dubbed. She earned another Oscar nomination for Splendor in the Grass, a film that explored themes of sexual repression and mental illness with raw honesty that was groundbreaking for its time. Critics praised her ability to convey complex emotions with just a glance, and audiences couldn't get enough of her. But behind the glamorous facade, Natalie's personal life was turbulent and complicated. In 1957, at just 19 years old, she married Robert Wagner in a ceremony that was the talk of Hollywood. Wagner, 8 years her senior, was himself a rising star, known for his good looks and charm. The marriage seemed like a fairy tale, two beautiful people at the height of their careers finding love. But fairy tales often have dark undercurrents. According to multiple published accounts, Natalie caught Wagner in an extramarital affair with another man during the early 1960s, a revelation that devastated her and led to their divorce in 1962. In an era when homosexuality was not only taboo but could end careers, this discovery shattered Natalie's illusions about her marriage. She then married British producer Richard Gregson in 1969, and they had a daughter, Natasha, who would later become an actress herself. But that marriage also ended in divorce after Natalie discovered Gregson was having an affair with their secretary. Then came the reconciliation that would ultimately end in tragedy. In 1972, a decade after their divorce, Natalie and Robert Wagner remarried. Friends said they had both matured, that they had worked through their issues and were ready to make it work this time. They had another daughter together, Courtney, and from the outside, they seemed to have achieved that elusive Hollywood happy ending. But those closest to them knew the truth was more complicated. Wagner was intensely jealous and possessive, traits that became more pronounced when he drank. Natalie, meanwhile, was fiercely independent and had become accustomed to making her own decisions during their years apart. She had dated some of Hollywood's most eligible bachelors, including Warren Beatty, and she wasn't about to surrender her autonomy just because she had remarried her first husband. By 1981, Natalie was 43 years old and staging a comeback after taking time off to focus on her family. Brainstorm represented her return to major motion pictures, and she was excited about the project and her co-star, Christopher Walken. Walken was an actor's actor, someone who took his craft seriously and brought intensity to every role. He and Natalie developed a close working relationship during filming, spending long hours discussing their characters and the themes of the movie. To outsiders and perhaps even to themselves, their relationship was purely professional. But to Robert Wagner, watching his wife grow close to another handsome, talented actor, it felt like a threat. Friends would later describe Wagner as becoming increasingly paranoid about Natalie's relationship with Walken, reading infidelity into innocent conversations and professional collaboration. Now we come to that fateful Thanksgiving weekend. Wagner later admitted in his memoir that he suggested the yacht trip partly to keep an eye on Natalie and Walken. He wanted to assess their relationship away from the movie set to see how they interacted in a social setting. What was supposed to be a relaxing getaway quickly became a pressure cooker of jealousy and suspicion. On Friday, November 27th, the group arrived at Catalina Island. They spent the day exploring, drinking, and trying to enjoy themselves, but the atmosphere was tense. Captain Dennis Davern, who had worked for the Wagners for years, later said he could sense trouble brewing from the moment Walken came aboard. Wagner was drinking heavily, starting early in the day and continuing through dinner. Natalie and Walken were engaged in animated conversations about acting and life, the kind of deep discussions that actors love, but that can seem exclusionary to others. Wagner grew quieter and darker as the day wore on, his jealousy simmering just below the surface. Saturday, November 28th, started much the same way. They had breakfast, took the yacht's dinghy to shore for lunch at a restaurant called Doug's Harbor Reef, and returned to the Splendour in the afternoon. Witnesses at the restaurant later reported that the group seemed to be having a good time, though Wagner was noticeably quieter than the others. Back on the yacht, the drinking continued. By evening, everyone had consumed a considerable amount of alcohol. Natalie's blood alcohol level would later be measured at 0.14%, nearly twice the legal limit for driving. Wagner and Walken had drunk even more. It was in this impaired state that the events of the evening began to unfold. What exactly happened next has been the subject of debate, investigation, and speculation for over 40 years. According to the initial statements given to police, Wagner and Walken got into an argument about Natalie's career. Wagner later admitted in his memoir that he smashed a wine bottle on the table during this confrontation, an act of aggression that shocked everyone present. He claimed the argument was about whether Natalie should continue acting or focus on her family, a debate that reflected his own insecurities and desire to control his wife's choices. Walken reportedly argued that Natalie was a talented actress who should pursue her career, while Wagner felt she should prioritize their daughters. The argument grew heated, with both men raising their voices and gesticulating wildly. Natalie, caught in the middle and probably embarrassed by her husband's behavior, retreated to the stateroom. At some point after this confrontation, Natalie would disappear from the yacht. Her body was discovered the next morning, floating in the water about a mile from the Splendour, dressed in a nightgown, socks, and a down jacket. The yacht's rubber dinghy was found nearby, beached on the rocks of a small cove. The initial investigation was shockingly brief and superficial. Lead detective Dwayne Razier concluded almost immediately that Natalie's death was an accidental drowning. The theory he proposed was that Natalie, hearing the dinghy banging against the side of the yacht, had gone on deck to secure it, slipped while trying to climb into the dinghy, and fallen into the water. Unable to climb back aboard because of her heavy waterlogged jacket and impaired by alcohol, she had drowned and succumbed to hypothermia in the 48-degree water. This explanation was accepted by the Los Angeles County coroner, Thomas Noguchi, who ruled the death an accidental drowning. The case was closed. Wagner was not considered a suspect. Christopher Walken was barely questioned. Dennis Davern, the captain, gave a statement that supported the accidental drowning theory. The Hollywood community mourned the loss of one of its brightest stars, and the world moved on. But some people couldn't move on. Natalie's sister, Lana Wood, never believed the official story. She pointed out that Natalie had a lifelong fear of dark water, a phobia so severe that she avoided swimming scenes in her movies whenever possible. The idea that Natalie would go out on deck alone in the dark, in rough conditions, to secure a dinghy, made no sense to anyone who knew her. Lana began asking questions, but in the early 1980s, she was dismissed as a grieving sister unable to accept a tragic accident. Dennis Davern, the boat captain, also harbored doubts, but he remained silent for years, bound by loyalty to Wagner and perhaps by fear of the powerful Hollywood establishment. Then, in 2008, Captain Dennis Davern broke his silence. In a Vanity Fair article and later in a book co-authored with Marty Rully called Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendour, Davern revealed a very different version of events from that night. He claimed that Wagner and Natalie had a vicious argument in their stateroom after the confrontation with Walken, that he had heard crashing sounds and raised voices, and that Wagner had been in a jealous rage. Davern said that when he realized Natalie was missing from the yacht, Wagner had prevented him from immediately turning on the searchlights or calling for help, insisting that they wait because Natalie was probably just trying to make them worry. According to Davern, precious time was lost during which Natalie could have been saved. He also admitted that he had lied to the police in his original statement, covering up the fight between Wagner and Wood at Wagner's request. These revelations were explosive, and they led to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopening the investigation in 2011. The new investigation brought fresh eyes and modern forensic techniques to the case. The lead detective, Ralph Hernandez, reviewed all the evidence and conducted new interviews. What he discovered painted a much darker picture than the original accidental drowning theory. New witnesses came forward, including people on nearby boats who reported hearing a woman's voice crying for help in the early morning hours, followed by a man's voice telling her to shut up or be quiet. These witnesses had never been interviewed during the original investigation. Forensic pathologists re-examined Natalie's body and discovered fresh bruises on her arms, legs, and face that were consistent with being involved in a physical altercation before entering the water. The original coroner had noted these bruises but explained them away as being caused by Natalie hitting rocks or the boat as she fell. The new examination suggested they occurred before she entered the water. In 2012, the Los Angeles County coroner officially changed Natalie Wood's cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. More significantly, in 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department named Robert Wagner a person of interest in the death investigation. This was a stunning development. A person of interest is not the same as a suspect, but it indicates that investigators believe someone may have information relevant to the case or may have been involved in the incident. Detectives wanted to interview Wagner again, to ask him about the new evidence and witness statements. But Wagner, through his lawyers, refused to speak with investigators. He released a statement calling the renewed investigation a publicity stunt and insisting he had told the truth about that night. So what is the truth? For decades, Robert Wagner's account has remained consistent in its broad strokes while being frustratingly vague in its details. In his 2008 memoir Pieces of My Heart, Wagner wrote about that night with what seemed like genuine anguish. He admitted that he and Natalie had been drinking heavily, that he had argued with both Walken and Natalie, and that he had smashed a wine bottle in anger. He wrote that after the argument, he and Walken sat in the salon talking for a while, drinking more and cooling down. When he went to check on Natalie in their stateroom, she wasn't there. He said he assumed she had taken the dinghy to go ashore, or was perhaps just somewhere else on the yacht. He claimed he wasn't initially alarmed because Natalie sometimes needed space after an argument. It was only when Dennis Davern pointed out that the dinghy was gone that Wagner said he began to worry. By then, according to Wagner, it was after midnight. They searched the yacht, called for Natalie, and eventually contacted the Coast Guard. But it was too late. Natalie's body was found at dawn, floating in her nightgown and down jacket, a victim of what Wagner insisted was a tragic accident. But this account has always raised more questions than it answers. If Wagner and Natalie argued, and then she disappeared, why didn't he immediately search for her? Why didn't he turn on the searchlights or wake everyone to help look for her? Wagner's explanation that he thought she was trying to teach him a lesson or get attention by going ashore has never made sense to people who knew Natalie. She wasn't the type to play games, especially not games involving her greatest fear, dark water. And why would she take a dinghy in the dark when she was terrified of water and had been drinking heavily? None of it adds up. Captain Davern's account directly contradicts Wagner's in crucial ways. Davern claims that Wagner prevented him from taking immediate action to search for Natalie, that Wagner said they should wait and let her cool off. If this is true, it suggests Wagner knew or suspected that Natalie had gone overboard but chose not to act immediately, a decision that could have cost her life. The new witnesses who came forward decades later add another troubling dimension to the story. Multiple people on nearby boats reported hearing a woman's voice calling for help in the water, followed by a man's voice. One witness said the man's voice seemed to be telling the woman to be quiet or to hold on. Another witness reported hearing sounds of an argument coming from the Splendour earlier in the evening, including what sounded like breaking glass. These witnesses were never contacted during the original investigation, which raises serious questions about how thorough that initial inquiry really was. Detective Dwayne Razier, who led the original investigation, has been accused of giving preferential treatment to Wagner because of his celebrity status and of rushing to a conclusion that would avoid scandal. Razier has defended his work, but critics point out that he closed the case in a matter of days without pursuing obvious leads or questioning witnesses who might have provided crucial information. The forensic evidence is equally troubling. The fresh bruises on Natalie's body suggest a physical struggle. Her down jacket, which was found on her body, would have become very heavy when wet, making it nearly impossible for her to swim or stay afloat. But why was she wearing a down jacket over her nightgown? This detail has puzzled investigators. One theory is that she put on the jacket after the argument with Wagner, intending to go on deck to get some air or to try to reach the dinghy to go ashore. But if she slipped and fell accidentally, as the original theory suggests, why was she wearing shoes? The socks and shoes she had on suggest she was planning to go somewhere, not that she stumbled out on deck in a panic. Every detail seems to point away from a simple accident and toward something more sinister. Now, at age 95, Robert Wagner has reportedly made a confession that could finally solve this decades-old mystery. According to sources close to the actor, Wagner has been suffering from declining health and is said to be tormented by guilt over what happened that night. Multiple entertainment outlets have reported that Wagner has broken his silence to family members and close confidants, revealing details about the night Natalie died that he has never shared publicly. While Wagner has not made an official public statement, and his representatives have denied these reports, the rumors have sent shockwaves through Hollywood and reignited public interest in the case. So what exactly has Wagner allegedly confessed? According to these sources, Wagner has admitted that the argument between him and Natalie that night was much worse than he previously acknowledged. He allegedly told confidants that his jealousy over Walken reached a boiling point, that he confronted Natalie in their stateroom and accused her of having an affair. In his rage, he allegedly grabbed her and shook her, and when she tried to leave the stateroom, he followed her onto the deck. The fight continued outside, and at some point, Natalie either slipped or was pushed near the swim step at the back of the yacht. According to these alleged confessions, Wagner claims he tried to grab her, but she fell into the water. Instead of immediately calling for help, Wagner allegedly panicked. He was drunk, had just been involved in a physical altercation with his wife, and knew how bad it would look. He allegedly told Dennis Davern to wait before raising the alarm, hoping that Natalie would make it to shore on her own, or that somehow the situation would resolve itself. By the time they officially reported her missing and the Coast Guard began searching, crucial hours had passed. Natalie, weighed down by her waterlogged jacket, had succumbed to hypothermia and drowning in the cold November waters. If these reports are accurate, Wagner's confession suggests that while he may not have intentionally killed Natalie, his actions and inaction directly contributed to her death. This would make him culpable, if not legally then certainly morally, for one of Hollywood's greatest tragedies. The question that haunts everyone who has followed this case is, will Robert Wagner ever face justice? From a legal standpoint, the case faces significant challenges. The statute of limitations for most crimes has long since passed, and proving what happened on that yacht over 40 years ago would be extremely difficult. Wagner would have to be charged with murder, and prosecutors would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he intentionally killed Natalie or that his actions showed a reckless disregard for her life. The evidence, while suggestive, is largely circumstantial. There are no living witnesses who actually saw what happened on the deck that night. Christopher Walken, who was aboard the yacht, has always maintained that he was asleep and didn't witness the events leading to Natalie's disappearance. He has given very few interviews about that night, and has said he doesn't know what happened to Natalie. Some have criticized Walken for his silence, suggesting that he knows more than he's saying, but he has never been named as a person of interest or suspect in the case. Dennis Davern remains the key witness. His testimony about what he heard and what Wagner told him could be crucial in any potential prosecution. But Davern's credibility has been questioned because he admitted to lying in his original statement to police. Defense attorneys would undoubtedly attack his credibility, arguing that he changed his story decades later to make money from books and media appearances. Davern has consistently maintained that he lied originally because he was intimidated and pressured by Wagner, and that his conscience eventually compelled him to tell the truth. Whether a jury would believe him is another question entirely. The other potential evidence, the witnesses who heard cries for help and arguments, is also problematic. These witnesses came forward decades after the fact, and their memories may be unreliable. The forensic evidence about the bruises on Natalie's body is compelling, but not conclusive. The bruises could have been caused by a physical altercation, or they could have occurred as Natalie struggled in the water or was battered by waves against rocks. Beyond the legal considerations, there's the question of whether Wagner will ever face the court of public opinion. For many years after Natalie's death, Wagner was largely shielded from serious scrutiny. He continued to work steadily in television, most notably in the series Heart to Heart and later in Austin Powers movies as Dr. Evil's nemesis number 2. He married actress Jill St. John, a longtime friend of both him and Natalie, in 1990, and they remain married today. For much of his later career, Wagner was seen as a charming relic of old Hollywood, a smooth-talking leading man from a more glamorous era. But as the evidence and witness statements have accumulated, and as new generations have learned about Natalie Wood's mysterious death, the tide of public opinion has turned against him. Social media has amplified calls for justice, with true crime enthusiasts and feminist activists pointing to the case as an example of how powerful men can literally get away with murder. The case has also taken on broader cultural significance as part of the Me Too movement and increased awareness about domestic violence. Many observers see Natalie Wood's death as emblematic of a time when women's safety was routinely sacrificed to protect powerful men's reputations. The original investigation's willingness to quickly accept Wagner's account without serious scrutiny reflects the systemic biases that allowed domestic violence and violence against women to go unpunished. By reopening the investigation and naming Wagner as a person of interest, modern law enforcement has sent a message that these cases deserve another look, that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. For Natalie's daughters, Natasha Gregson Wagner and Courtney Wagner, the ongoing investigation and media attention have been painful. Natasha has been particularly vocal about her belief that her mother's death was a tragic accident and that the continued focus on the case dishonors her mother's memory. She has said that she believes her stepfather loved her mother and would never have hurt her intentionally. Courtney, Wagner's biological daughter with Natalie, has been more private about her views, but has generally supported her father. Lana Wood, Natalie's younger sister, takes a very different view. She has been outspoken in her belief that Wagner is responsible for Natalie's death and should be held accountable. Lana has participated in documentaries about the case, given numerous interviews, and called for the investigation to continue. She has criticized Natasha for defending Wagner, suggesting that Natasha's loyalty to her stepfather, who raised her after Natalie's death, has clouded her judgment. The family conflict adds another layer of tragedy to an already heartbreaking story. Natalie's death didn't just rob the world of a talented actress. It tore apart a family and left wounds that have never healed. The truth about what happened that night aboard the Splendour has become a Rorschach test, with different people seeing different things in the same set of facts. Those who believe Wagner is guilty point to his jealousy, his violent temper, his refusal to cooperate with the reopened investigation, and the inconsistencies in his story. Those who believe him point to his decades-long insistence on his innocence, the lack of direct evidence of murder, and the fact that he has never been charged with any crime. What makes this case so compelling and so frustrating is that we may never know the complete truth. Unless Wagner makes a full, verified confession with details that only someone who was there would know, or unless new evidence emerges that definitively proves what happened, the mystery of Natalie Wood's death will remain just that, a mystery. And that perhaps is the cruelest aspect of this tragedy. Natalie Wood deserves justice. She deserves for the truth to be known. She was a brilliant actress who brought joy to millions through her performances. She was a mother who loved her daughters. She was a woman who overcame childhood trauma and the pressures of fame to build a life and career on her own terms. Her death should not be a footnote, a cautionary tale, or an unsolved mystery. It should be treated with the seriousness and thoroughness that any suspicious death deserves. The alleged confession from Robert Wagner, if true, would finally provide the answers that have eluded investigators for over 4 decades. It would validate the suspicions of Lana Wood, Dennis Davern, and countless others who never believed the accidental drowning theory. It would force Hollywood to reckon with how it protected one of its own at the expense of truth and justice. And most importantly, it would give Natalie Wood's story the ending it deserves, not a neat and tidy Hollywood ending, but an honest one. The fact that Wagner is 95 years old adds urgency to the situation. If he does possess information that could solve the case, time is running out for him to share it. Deathbed confessions are a staple of true crime stories, and while they can't bring back the victim or fully repair the damage done, they can provide closure and a sense that justice, however delayed, has been served. But we must also ask ourselves, what would justice look like in this case? If Wagner confessed to accidentally pushing Natalie or causing her to fall during an argument, would that be enough? If he admitted to preventing the boat captain from immediately searching for her, leading to her death, what should the consequences be? Should a 95-year-old man spend his final days in prison for something that happened over 40 years ago? These are difficult questions with no easy answers. Some would argue that no amount of time diminishes the severity of the crime or the need for accountability. Others would say that prosecuting an elderly man decades after the fact serves no practical purpose and would only cause more pain for the families involved. The criminal justice system is designed to balance punishment, rehabilitation, and deterrence. But in a case like this, with such unusual circumstances, it's unclear how those principles should apply. What is clear is that the story of Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood continues to fascinate and disturb us because it touches on fundamental questions about truth, power, justice, and accountability. It reminds us that fame and fortune cannot insulate people from tragedy or protect them from the consequences of their actions. It shows us how easily the powerful can manipulate investigations and control narratives, especially when those investigations occur in an era before social media, DNA evidence, and the kind of forensic techniques we take for granted today. The Natalie Wood case has become a symbol of how far we've come in taking violence against women seriously, but also how far we still have to go. As we await further developments in the case, as we watch to see if Robert Wagner will make an official confession or if investigators will uncover new evidence that finally solves the mystery, we are left to contemplate the life and legacy of Natalie Wood herself. She was born into poverty, pushed into stardom by an overbearing mother, navigated the treacherous waters of Hollywood as both a child and an adult, survived failed marriages and professional setbacks, and was finally finding her footing again when her life was cut short at age 43. She left behind a body of work that continues to inspire and entertain. Films like Miracle on 34th Street, Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendour in the Grass are timeless classics that showcase her range and talent. She earned 3 Academy Award nominations, rare achievement that speaks to the respect she commanded from her peers. But beyond her professional accomplishments, Natalie Wood represents something more. She represents the thousands of women whose voices have been silenced, whose deaths have been explained away, whose stories have been controlled by powerful men. Every time someone shares her story, every time a new generation discovers the mystery of her death, we are choosing to say that her life mattered, that the truth matters, that justice matters. We are refusing to let her be forgotten or reduced to a mere Hollywood cautionary tale. We are insisting that she deserves better than to be remembered primarily for the mysterious circumstances of her death. She should be remembered for her talent, her beauty, her resilience, and her humanity. The woods are dark and deep, and the waters off Catalina Island are cold and unforgiving. But the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Whether through Robert Wagner's alleged confession, through continued investigation, or through the persistence of those who refuse to let the case be forgotten, we may yet learn what really happened on the Splendour that November night. And when we do, we owe it to Natalie Wood to listen, to learn, and to ensure that her death, however tragic, was not in vain. Her story can teach us about the importance of believing victims, of conducting thorough investigations regardless of who is involved, of not letting fame and power corrupt the pursuit of justice. These lessons are as relevant today as they were in 1981, perhaps even more so as we continue to grapple with issues of domestic violence, sexual assault, and the abuse of power in the entertainment industry and beyond. The legacy of Natalie Wood is complex and multifaceted. To some, she will always be little Susan Walker, the girl who believed in Santa Claus. To others, she is the tortured Judy in Rebel Without a Cause, the passionate Maria in West Side Story, or the heartbroken Deanie in Splendour in the Grass. To true crime enthusiasts, she is the beautiful victim of a mysterious drowning that may have been murder. But to those who truly appreciate her and the full scope of her life, she is all of these things and more. She is a reminder of Hollywood's golden age, a testament to the power of cinema to create beauty and meaning, and a symbol of the unfinished business that continues to haunt us when justice is denied. As Robert Wagner enters the twilight of his life, as the investigation continues, as new generations discover Natalie Wood's films and learn about her mysterious death, we are reminded that some stories never truly end. They evolve, they reveal new facets, they challenge us to think differently about what we thought we knew. In the end, the question of what happened to Natalie Wood may be less important than what we do with the answer. If Robert Wagner did confess, if we finally learn the truth after all these years, will it change how we think about celebrity, about domestic violence, about the way we investigate crimes involving the rich and famous? Will it lead to reforms in how police handle suspicious deaths? Will it inspire other witnesses to come forward in other cold cases, knowing that their testimony might still matter decades later? These are the questions that give Natalie Wood's story resonance beyond the immediate tragedy. This is why millions of people remain fascinated by a death that occurred over 40 years ago. Because at its core, this story is about more than one woman's death. It's about our collective search for truth and justice in a world that too often seems to deny both. So here we are, more than 4 decades after Natalie Wood's body was pulled from the cold waters off Catalina Island, still searching for answers, still demanding justice, still refusing to let her story be forgotten. Robert Wagner's alleged confession, whether it's verified or not, has reopened wounds that never fully healed and forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the price some people pay for knowing too much or asking too many questions. The Splendour still exists, though it has changed hands several times since that fateful night. The waters off Catalina Island are still popular with boaters and tourists, many of whom are unaware of the tragedy that occurred there. And somewhere, in archived footage and classic films, Natalie Wood still smiles, still cries, still performs with the grace and talent that made her a star. She is frozen in time, forever young, forever beautiful, forever unaware of how her story would end and how it would continue to captivate the world long after her death. The truth about what happened on the Splendour that night may finally be coming to light. After decades of silence, evasion, and speculation, we may be approaching the moment when Natalie Wood gets the justice she deserves. Whether that justice comes in the form of legal prosecution, public acknowledgement, or simply the revelation of long-hidden truths, it will be a reckoning that is long overdue. Robert Wagner, now 95 years old and facing the end of his own life, may finally be ready to unburden himself of the secret he has carried for over 4 decades. If he truly confesses to what happened that night, it will be one of the most significant moments in true crime history, a resolution to a mystery that has haunted Hollywood and captivated the public for generations. And if he doesn't, if he takes the truth to his grave, then Natalie Wood's death will remain forever shrouded in mystery, a tragic end to a brilliant life, a question without an answer, a wound that never fully heals. But either way, Natalie Wood's legacy will endure. She will be remembered not just for the mystery of her death, but for the brilliance of her life, for the joy she brought to millions through her performances, for the barriers she broke and the trails she blazed. She will be remembered as more than a victim, more than a mystery, more than a footnote in Hollywood history. She will be remembered as Natalie Wood, one of the greatest actresses of her generation, a woman who lived fully and loved deeply, whose life was cut tragically short, but whose impact continues to resonate. And that, in the end, may be the most fitting tribute of all.